You've probably seen the headlines. Charles rejects Harry's desperate plea. Titles stripped away. Royal family declares war on the Sussexes. Every week there's a new one, each more dramatic than the last, and almost none of them are actually true. So today, we're doing something different. We're going to walk through exactly what Buckingham Palace has confirmed about the relationship between King Charles and Prince Harry, in order, with dates and sources, and then we're going to look honestly at everything else that's floating around out there. The stuff that gets dressed up as fact, but is really just anonymous gossip from unnamed insiders. By the end of this, you'll know the difference, and you'll probably understand this story better than most people who only read the thumbnails. Let's start at the beginning of the timeline that actually matters, because the real story is genuinely more interesting than the fake one. Rewind to February 2024. King Charles has just been diagnosed with cancer, and the news breaks publicly, catching much of the country off guard. Prince Harry, who has been living in California since stepping back from royal duties in 2020, gets on a plane within days. He flies to London and spends a brief window with his father. Reports at the time put it at around 45 minutes at Clarence House, the King's London residence. Then he flies home to California the very next day. No cameras inside, no statement about what was said. Just a quiet, urgent visit from a son to a sick father. That's the first documented contact between them in over a year. And for a lot of royal watchers, it's the moment that cracked open the possibility that this rift might not be permanent. Then there's a long gap. More than a year passes with no confirmed meetings. During that stretch, Harry is dealing with a string of UK court cases, most notably his ongoing legal fight over the police security detail that was removed when he stopped being a working royal. He loses an appeal on that front in the spring of 2025. And then, in May of 2025, he sits down for an emotional interview with the BBC. In it, he talks openly about wanting reconciliation with his family. He says something that ends up getting quoted everywhere afterward, that he doesn't know how much longer his father has, given the cancer diagnosis, and that life is precious. It's a raw, direct public plea, and it's one of the few moments in this whole saga where we're not relying on an anonymous source. Harry said it, on camera, himself. 4 months later, something happens. September 10th, 2025. King Charles, who's been up at Balmoral in Scotland for the summer, travels back down to London. Prince Harry, in the UK for a few days of charity engagements, is seen arriving at Clarence House by car in the early evening. Buckingham Palace confirms, on the record, that the king had a private tea with his son. The meeting lasts somewhere between 50 and 55 minutes. Afterward, as Harry's driven away to his next event, a reporter calls out and asks how the king is doing. Harry's answer, word for word: "Yes, he's great. Thank you." That's the entirety of what either side says publicly about it. The palace declines to comment further. No details on what was discussed. No readout. Nothing. But the fact of the meeting itself, confirmed by the palace, is real. It's the first face-to-face contact between them since that brief February 2024 visit. A gap of about 19 months. Now fast forward again, this time about 10 months, to July 10th, 2026. And this is the big one. Genuinely the most significant confirmed development in this entire relationship in years. King Charles and Queen Camilla host Prince Harry, Meghan, and their 2 children, Archie and Lilibet, at Highgrove House, the King's private country residence in Gloucestershire. This is confirmed by Buckingham Palace and reported by outlets including the BBC, CNN, France 24, and the Associated Press. And here's why it matters so much more than the September tea. This is the first time King Charles has seen the entire Sussex family together in 4 years. Since the Platinum Jubilee celebrations back in 2022, before the Queen's death, before the coronation, before any of the public falling out over the memoir and the interviews had fully played out in the way we now know it did. Harry had been in the UK that week, marking the one-year countdown to the 2027 Invictus Games, the international competition for wounded and ill veterans that he founded. The gathering itself is described, by people briefed on it, as private, warm, and low-key. A family afternoon, not a photo op, not a formal state occasion. Just Charles, Camilla, Harry, Meghan, and 2 grandchildren the king hadn't spent real time with in years. So let's actually total up the confirmed record, because it's worth saying plainly. 1 short, urgent visit in 2024 driven by a cancer diagnosis. 1 private tea in September 2025 after a 19-month gap. And 1 full family reunion in July 2026 that, for the first time in 4 years, included Meghan and the children. That is a real, slow, documented thaw. It is not a single dramatic reconciliation moment, and it is also not a confirmed rupture or falling out. It's messier and more human than either of those things, which is probably exactly why it doesn't make for a good clickbait thumbnail. To understand why each of those small steps carries so much weight, it helps to remember how deep the original rift actually was. Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties in early 2020, moved first to Canada and then to California. And over the following 2 years, the disagreements that had been simmering privately spilled out in public, layer by layer. There was the Oprah interview in 2021, where Meghan described struggling with her mental health during her time as a working royal, and where allegations were raised about conversations concerning their son Archie's skin tone before he was born. Allegations the family has never publicly detailed a response to beyond a brief statement from the late Queen saying the family would address the issues raised privately. Then came the Netflix docuseries in December 2022, followed weeks later by Harry's memoir, Spare, in January 2023, in which he wrote at length and in detail about his relationship with his father and brother, including specific disagreements and private conversations he chose to make public. That's the backdrop against which every subsequent meeting has to be read. When 2 people have that much on the record between them, a 50-minute tea or a family afternoon in Gloucestershire isn't a small thing. It's a genuinely significant act, even if it doesn't resolve everything in one sitting. It's also worth noting what didn't happen along the way, because absence of an event is sometimes as telling as its presence. Harry did return to the UK for 2 major royal occasions in between the falling out and the more recent thaw: Queen Elizabeth's funeral in September 2022 and King Charles's coronation in May 2023. Both times, he attended without Meghan, and both times, coverage at the time described his interactions with the rest of the family as brief and formal rather than warm. Those 2 events don't count as reconciliation steps in the way the 2024, 2025, and 2026 meetings do. They were institutional obligations, not chosen family time. The distinction matters because it's part of why royal commentators generally treat the more recent private visits as more meaningful than the public ceremonial ones. Nobody has to invite you to tea. You have to be invited and you have to accept. Okay, so that's the confirmed part. Now let's talk about everything that happened after that July reunion, because this is where the story gets murky, and where it's worth understanding how the tabloid machine around this family actually operates, because that machine produces the overwhelming majority of what gets published about them week to week. In the weeks following the Highgrove gathering, multiple outlets ran stories about a photo Meghan reportedly posted to Instagram, said to show the family visiting Princess Diana's grave. According to claims attributed to unnamed insiders in several of these pieces, King Charles and Queen Camilla were unhappy about the post. The implication being that sharing a visit to Diana's resting place publicly crossed some kind of unwritten family line. A few of these stories go quite a bit further than that. They quote anonymous sources claiming the king is now, in their words, extremely disappointed in both Harry and Meghan, and that the wider family has, as one outlet put it, ruled out inviting the Sussexes back for Christmas entirely. None of that second layer has been confirmed by the palace. Not the disappointment, not the Christmas exclusion, not any internal family reaction at all. It comes entirely from unnamed insiders and sources close to the family, which, if you've followed royal coverage for any length of time, you'll recognize as the standard, almost universal sourcing language across nearly all UK celebrity and royal tabloid journalism. That doesn't necessarily mean it's fabricated. Some reporting sourced this way has turned out, over the years, to be broadly accurate. But it does mean you, the reader, are being asked to just trust it, sight unseen, from outlets whose business model depends on this particular family, staying dramatic, staying in conflict, and staying clickable. There's more where that came from. A separate set of stories from outlets like Reality Tea and Stylecaster describe the relationship between Charles and Harry, post-reunion, as standing completely still, claiming, again via unnamed sourcing, that the two haven't spoken since July and have no plans for a follow-up visit. Other pieces claim Prince William has been privately furious that his father is even pursuing reconciliation with Harry at all, and that he's stepped back from trying to change Charles's mind because he's given up on it working. Still others report that Harry is considering a public apology to smooth things over, or that he might be offered a stay at Buckingham Palace on a future visit, or that Charles has quietly offered to be a sounding board if Harry's marriage ever hits a rough patch. Notice the pattern in every single one of these. Anonymous insider or source. Published by a celebrity news site. Never confirmed on the record by the palace, by Harry's team, or by any named person actually involved. Some of it might be true. Some of it is probably at least loosely based on something real. But none of it is verifiable from the outside, and treating it as settled fact, the way a headline like "Charles rejects Harry's desperate plea" does, is simply not honest reporting. It's storytelling dressed up as news. And it's worth spending a minute on why that particular kind of headline works so well. Because it's not random. It borrows the actual shape of real events, a real meeting, a real photo, real, long-documented tension between two brothers, and then escalates that shape into something absolute and emotionally charged. A relationship that's gone quiet and unconfirmed since July becomes rejected. Some reported family irritation over a photo becomes titles stripped. The kernel is often genuinely real. The framing around it is manufactured, engineered specifically to make you click. And it works precisely because there's just enough truth buried in there to make it feel plausible. And for the record, because this specific claim comes up constantly, no royal titles have actually been stripped from Harry or Meghan in any confirmed 2026 action. What did happen, and this is old, settled history at this point, not new news, is that back in 2020, both sides agreed Harry and Meghan would step back as working royals and stop using their Royal Highness styling in an official capacity. That agreement is years old. Nothing in the confirmed record since then involves any further action on titles, despite how often that claim resurfaces in a fresh headline as if it just happened. It's worth being precise about this because titles gets used loosely in headlines to mean several different things, and conflating them is part of how these stories get manufactured. Harry remains, formally, the Duke of Sussex. That's a title granted by the late Queen at the time of his wedding, and dukedoms aren't something that gets casually withdrawn. Historically, it requires an act of Parliament, which has never been initiated against Harry. What actually changed in 2020 was the use of the HRH, His or Her Royal Highness, in an official or commercial capacity, and their status as paid, working members of the family carrying out royal engagements on the institution's behalf. Those are honorific and functional distinctions, not a stripping of the dukedom itself. So when a headline says titles were stripped away as though it's breaking news in 2026, it's almost always either recycling the 2020 agreement as if it just happened, or referring to something that hasn't actually occurred at all. Either way, it's not new information, and it's not accurate to present it as a confirmed recent event. There's also a recurring category of story worth flagging separately. Pieces that frame minor, unremarkable royal-adjacent events as evidence of a feud. A Christmas card that doesn't include a certain family member. A birthday message that goes unposted on an official social account. A seating arrangement at a public event. Individually, these details are almost always explainable by scheduling, protocol, or simple oversight, but strung together and narrated with words like snub or cold shoulder, they read as evidence of an active conflict, even when no one involved has said anything of the sort. It's a similar mechanism to the insider sourcing problem. A neutral or ambiguous fact gets a dramatic interpretation bolted onto it, and the interpretation is what actually spreads. So let's be honest about the actual limits of what's knowable here, because that's more useful than pretending certainty we don't have. We don't know what was actually said in either the September 2025 tea or the July 2026 Highgrove gathering. Nobody who was in the room has given any detailed public account, and probably never will. We don't know whether Charles and Harry have spoken since July, or whether there's another visit being planned right now. The claims on both sides of that question come entirely from unnamed sources with no way to check them. We don't know Charles's actual private reaction to the Diana photo, assuming he had one. We only have second-hand anonymous characterizations of it, filtered through outlets with an incentive to make it sound as dramatic as possible. And we don't know what William genuinely thinks about his father's approach to Harry, beyond the fact that some degree of tension between the two brothers has been acknowledged, in fairly general terms, by people close to the family for years now. That part, at least, isn't new. What we do know, what's actually documented and confirmed, is the pattern underneath all of it. Contact slowly resuming after years of public estrangement, in short visits, spaced months apart, with long silences in between, and, importantly, no public statement from either Charles or Harry themselves suggesting anger, rejection, or any reversal of the ground that's been gained. So is the relationship between Charles and Harry over the way some of this month's headlines want you to believe? Based on anything actually confirmed? No. Is it fully repaired and back to normal, the way a few of the more optimistic pieces suggest? Also, no. What's real is slower and messier than either version. Two men, once deeply estranged, taking small, genuine steps back toward each other, while an entire media industry built around this family turns every one of those steps into either a five-alarm crisis or a fairy tale ending, depending on which sells better that week. The honest version of this story doesn't come with a dramatic thumbnail. It's a father and son having tea for under an hour after 19 months apart. It's a quiet family afternoon in Gloucestershire, with two grandchildren the king hadn't properly spent time with in 4 years. And it's a lot of anonymous sources filling in the silence between those two real moments, with whatever keeps the story alive for one more week. That's the actual record. Make of it what you will. And next time you see one of those confirms headlines about this family, it's worth asking who's actually confirming it, and who's just quoting somebody nobody can name. One more thing worth mentioning before we wrap up, because it comes up in the comments every time we cover this family. None of this is a statement about who's right. in the broader dispute between Harry and the rest of the royal family. That's a separate, much more complicated question involving years of public statements, legal disputes, and deeply personal grievances on multiple sides. And it's not something that gets settled by fact-checking a handful of 2026 headlines. What this video is actually about is narrower and, hopefully, more useful than picking a side. It's about the specific, practical difference between a fact that's been confirmed by an institution or a named source and a claim that's been attributed to nobody in particular. That distinction matters regardless of how you feel about Harry, or Meghan, or Charles, or William, because it's the same distinction that should apply to literally any news story about anyone. Royal coverage just happens to be one of the clearest, highest volume examples of how often that line gets blurred on purpose. If you found this useful, it's worth applying the same instinct next time you see a royal headline anywhere. Not just about Charles and Harry, but about William and Kate, about Andrew, about any member of this family. Ask 2 questions before you accept the claim. Who is actually saying this, by name? And has it been confirmed by the institution or person it's about? If the answer to both is, an anonymous insider says so, treat it as a rumor, not a fact, no matter how confidently the headline states it. If it's something Buckingham Palace, the person themselves, or a named on-record source has confirmed, then you're looking at something closer to the real story. That's really the whole point of doing it this way, instead of just repeating whatever headline is trending this week. The confirmed version of the Charles and Harry story is genuinely compelling on its own. A father with a serious illness, a son who once said he didn't know how much time was left, a 19-month silence, a 50-minute tea, and then, almost a year later, an entire family finally back in the same room for the first time since a jubilee that feels like a different era now. You don't need to invent a rejection or a stripped title to make that story worth telling. It's worth telling exactly as it happened. If you want the sourcing on everything covered here, Buckingham Palace's confirmations as reported by the BBC, CNN, France 24, and the Associated Press, alongside the unconfirmed insider claims from outlets like Reality Tea, Stylecaster, and The List. It's all linked below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.